$10,000 to your favorite charity.
You go to white.
Where Elder said there's no racism. What Elder says is that it says, Elder, you keep saying
Old, apparently black.
So this troll writes me and says, Elder, you keep saying there's no racism. Penalty flag. $10,000 to your favorite charity where you find where Elder said there's no racism. What Elder says is that racism is no longer a major factor in American life anymore and can no longer hold somebody back who's determined. You know who else would agree with me, although it's always dicey to say dead people would agree with you? Martin Luther King. A little more than 40 years before Barack Obama became president, he was interviewed.
Frankly, I have seen certain changes in the United States over the last 2 years that surprised me. I've seen levels of compliance with the Civil Rights Bill and changes that have been most surprising. So on the basis of this, I think we may be able to get a Negro president in less than 40 years. I would think that this could come in 25 years or less.
Note he didn't say when a black person becomes a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He didn't say when a black person becomes president of an Ivy League university. He didn't say when a black person becomes coach of Notre Dame. He didn't say when a black person becomes the head of the American Medical Association, when a black person becomes the head of the American Bar Association, when a black person becomes a governor of one of the original states of the Confederacy, all of which have happened. He said the mountaintop, the peak, the summit is when a black person becomes president of the United States. Now that has not stopped people like Eric Holder, the former AG under Obama, who in my opinion is a more dangerous race card hustler than Al Sharpton, from saying America is still bedeviled by what he called pernicious racism. He gave 3 examples. Let's go over them because none of them hold water. Example number 1, he said that black boys get suspended and expelled from schools longer, sooner, more often than do white boys. And he's right. What Jackson didn't say is that irrespective of the race of the teacher, irrespective of the race of the principal, irrespective of the race of the school board, black boys are disproportionately kicked out compared to white boys. Do you know why? Behavior. Reverend Jackson sued the Decatur School Board, which was all white, for expelling some black boys who were fighting after a football game.
This fight broke out in the stands of the MacArthur Eisenhower football game in Decatur. As a result, 6 students were expelled, the result of the district's zero-tolerance policy on violence. But the school board's decision caught the attention of Reverend Jesse Jackson of the Rainbow Push Coalition in Chicago.
The school board noted, as I said, that it doesn't matter the race of the principal or the school board. Black boys are disproportionately kicked out compared to other races of a given school. Now, why does anyone not want to talk about behavior? Is it or is it not true that black boys are far more likely than white boys to come from single-parent households? And forget about Elder. Barack Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Why are we talking about that? There is a huge problem here. And blaming teachers, calling them racist, is that than white boys to come from single-parent households? And forget about Elder. Barack Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Why are we talking about that? There is a huge problem here. And blaming teachers, calling them racist, does that get us anywhere? Now, Eric Holder's second example of pernicious racism, voter ID laws.
Attorney General Eric Holder is an outspoken critic against these and similar voter ID laws.
Apparently he doesn't think black people can get ID.
A lot of the assumptions that people make about people having the necessary ID is not accurate. There are a substantial number of people who live in cities who do not have driver's licenses. There are people who have voted for 50 and 60 years who do not have the required identification that some of these new laws say they must have in order to vote. In some instances, as we saw in Texas, getting the required identification materials is too difficult.
Really?
You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID? That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like, we know what we need to carry around.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
What is this, some type of trick candy cameras?
I know, right? That's the only thing I brought with me.
Those are legit IDs. I heard a lot also that black people can't figure out how to get to the DMV.
Really?
What does that say to you?
I know it's that. It's on 25th Street.
Do you know where the DMV is around you?
It's on 125th Street and 3rd Avenue, I believe.
You know how to get there?
Yeah.
Would you have a problem getting there if you had to get there?
No.
I know these sound like silly questions. You know how to get to the DMV?
Of course.
You know where it is?
Yes.
You can get there?
Uh-huh.
No problem.
No problem.
Just checking.
Okay.
And I also heard a lot that black people, especially poor black people, have no access to the internet, can't figure out how to use the internet.
That's just stupidity, honestly. Everybody has access to the internet. Even a little kid could figure out how to work the internet.
The other thing we found is, and I'm sorry to go on, but this is really important to me, the other portion is a lot of people don't know how to register. Not everybody in the community, in the Hispanic and the African American community, particularly in rural areas that are distant and or inner city districts, know how to get online.
I had access to the internet for years.
You know how to use it properly, right?
Exactly. I do it at work. So, of course, I know how to use it. My kids know how to use it. They all have iPads, iPods, whatever.
Your phone has data?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually
Unlimited.
Unlimited data.
Mm-hmm. I use my phone as a hotspot.
What does that say to you for the people who have this perception of black people?
They're pretty much ignorant. That's what my thought process was.
I just think that's ignorant. Ignorant.
Ignorant. That's the word I'm hearing a lot. Ignorant.
Very, very ignorant.
Does it sound racist for somebody to say that?
I think it is a little racist because, you're putting people in a category and you have no idea what you're talking about.
Maybe a little bit of racist in it, but like I said, I think it's more stupidity and ignorance.
Judging somebody, you're judging them because they black, saying that they don't got it.
What people are they talking to? Who are these people talking to?
Do you have a problem that if you go to vote and they say, can we please see your ID to make sure you are who you say you are? Are you
Love showing my ID.
You got no problem with that?
Nope.
Would you have a problem if when you go to vote, if they say, can we please see your ID to make sure you are who you say you are? Do you have an issue with that?
No.
And you know what else? Polls show black voters support voter ID, in some cases, almost as much as white voters do. If voter ID laws are suppressing the black vote, it ain't working. In 2008, the year that Barack Obama ran for president, as a percentage of eligible voters, more blacks voted than did whites. So the voter ID laws, if they're designed to suppress the black vote, they ain't working. The third example that Eric Holder gave is the fact that black criminals get a longer sentence for the same crime committed by a white criminal. What he didn't tell you is that the U.S. Sentencing Commission says that is the fact that black criminals get a longer sentence for the same crime committed by a white criminal. What he didn't tell you is that the U.S. Sentencing Commission says that when a judge examines a criminal's record and looks at convictions, that becomes part of the sentencing. And it turns out that the average black criminal has a longer criminal record than the average white criminal. That accounts for the discrepancy. So all three of the examples are lame. You see, here's the problem. When the demand for examples of racism exceeds the available examples of racism, it becomes necessary to invent new examples of racism. And often it's complete and total horse. And the late, great Walter Williams lays out exactly what one needs to do to escape poverty. And it has nothing to do with one's race.
There are 4 steps that a person can take, whether he's black or white, that will guarantee that he will not live a life of poverty. 1 is to graduate from high school. 2, to take any kind of job. 3, get married before you have children. And 4, stay out of the criminal justice system.
Any questions, Mr. Holder, a man who is with a major law firm in Washington, D.C. as a partner, makes a boatload of money while bitching and moaning and whining about how you, as a black man, can't make a boatload of money because racism is holding you back. Didn't hold Mr. Holder back, but it held you back.
If you tell a big enough lie and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The defendant here should be charged with perjury and fraud. He's a facade. Mr. Race, I studied your history. There's no evidence that you actually existed before the 15th century.
Joe Biden is trying to clean up a gaffe, and this is something that happened during an interview Thursday with Black and Hispanic journalists.
What you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community. with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
Insult to the black community and trying to limit the political fallout of the suggestion that the black community is monolithic.
Do you believe that all white people have taken part in racial violence, which is what you wrote?
I believe that society is built on the foundation. It's not what I believe, it's a fact that society is built on the foundations of colonialism and slavery.
These are the sentences that you wrote. I don't have the energy to talk about racial violence of white people anymore. Yes, all white people.
Yes, and these are my feelings.
No one would want you to censor yourself. It's the specificity, it's the accuracy.
I think this is the problem, is that white people are thinking about how it makes them feel when racism doesn't affect them. It affects people of colour. The system is not put in place to affect white people, and white people need to get over the fact that, yes, it's a really uncomfortable truth. It's a really inconvenient truth. Get over that get over that discomfort.
It's not necessarily a matter of individual merit in the sense that if you're born into a culture and into a family where there are certain values, and particularly if there are families that really insist upon those values, where it's not a matter of doing your own thing, then you will grow up with those values and you will have whatever the benefits happen to come along with those values.
You say 1619 is as important as 1776.
Yes. Our decision to buy that first group of 20 to 30 Africans would influence almost everything that would follow after. I think it is foundational. It is as foundational to who we became as a country as our decision in 1776 to break off from the British.
Recently, some school districts have decided that they'll be teaching a unit on early American history based on the New York Times 1619 project, which illustrates how the founding of this country is inextricably tied to the institution of slavery.
One of the sad things is that we talk in this country as if slavery was something unique to the United States or to blacks and whites. And in point of fact, slavery was one of the oldest institutions among human beings. They go back as far as there is recorded history. Archaeological finds suggest that slavery existed before human beings could read and write. So a racial difference between the slaves and the enslavers, that is a relatively new phenomenon. You didn't have in ancient times the ability to go to another continent and move millions of people of a different race across the ocean. So you enslaved the people who were nearby. The Europeans enslaved Slavs for centuries before they brought the first black African to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, but so you're not suggesting, you do not wish to say anything other than that slavery as practiced in the United States was, it may have been recent, but you'd be willing to grant that it was particularly perverse and destructive because race got mixed into it at that point, right?
Race got mixed into it in the United States more than anywhere else for a very simple reason. The United States was founded, as the Declaration said, of independence, said all men are created equal.
Right.
If that's true, then the only way you can justify slavery is to say that some men are less than men.
I see. So the racial
but in Brazil, where Brazil imported more slaves than the United States, there was no such ideology. Brazil was not a democratic country. The whole issue never arose.
I see.
But I didn't know any black people. No, I really didn't. You didn't know any white people either. And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Most people have not recognized the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today. Most black kids grew up in homes with two parents under slavery itself and for generations thereafter. And as late as the 1960s, most black children grew up in two-parent homes. When you think about it, I mean, centuries of slavery and generations of Jim Crow did not destroy the black family, but one generation of the welfare state did.
You did a crime bill, 1994, where you called them super predators, African American.
Kids grew up in homes with two parents.
I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Most people have not recognized the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today. Most black kids grew up in homes with two parents under slavery itself and for generations thereafter. And as late as the 1960s, most black children grew up in two-parent homes. When you think about it, I mean, centuries of slavery and generations of Jim Crow did not destroy the black family, but one generation of the welfare state did.
You did a crime bill, 1994, where you call them super predators, African Americans, the super predators, and they've never forgotten it. And I'm letting people out of jail now that you have treated the African American population community, you have treated the black community about as bad as anybody in this country.
Black Americans, a group often identified as beneficiaries of the welfare state in America, made considerable economic progress in the 20th century. Fine, of course, but much, if not most, this is the thing with you, the dependent clause is where the sting is, but much, if not most, of this progress was prior to the massive expansion of the American welfare state, close quote. That is so I want to say counterintuitive because we hear so much about African American progress since civil rights and the establishment of the welfare state that it really has become a kind of American intuition. Explain yourself, Dr. Sowell.
Well, as of 1940, 87% of black households were in poverty. Over the next 20 years, that declined to 47%. This is all prior to the civil rights laws, prior to the social welfare policies of the Johnson administration. Over the next 20 years, it fell an additional 18 points. But that was just the same trend continuing at a reduced rate. Affirmative action is even worse. Poverty rate was something like 30% among black households before affirmative action. And a decade after affirmative action, it was 29%. This is not the same as the 40% decline that occurred before there were any civil rights laws and before there was any social welfare state. Racism is an attitude inside people's heads.
Right.
Discrimination is an overt act taking place outside in the real world.
Okay.
So not only with blacks, but you find the same thing with Jews in previous centuries, that part of the United States where there was the most racism against blacks, namely the South,
right,
is where black construction workers were much more common than they were in the North, right on into the 20th century. Most people are unaware that in the South, blacks were the construction workers. I remember a professor at Howard University saying that when he was a boy in the South, his father pointed to some man on the street and said, he was the first white construction worker in this town.
And so what was going on there? The racism did not, so whites could think of blacks as somehow or other separate, but they'd still employ them because the market made it profitable to do so.
Yeah, in fact, yes. In fact, a law had to be passed to stop this because in the 20s, and particularly as the Depression got underway, black construction companies in the South using black non-union labor would come up to the North and underbid on government contracts, taking them away. And so this was very common, to the point where they passed the Davis-Bacon Act, which said that on government contracts you must pay the prevailing wage, which translated almost invariably into the union wage.
So your point on the distinction between racism and discrimination is, don't worry about racism. It's inside people's heads. You can't measure it. There's a strongly subjective, just forget about it, concentrate only on discrimination. And the best answer to discrimination is to let markets operate, because then people will discover, it will tend to militate against discrimination. When people have skills to offer, they'll be employed. Whatever this notion of racism in people's heads is, don't worry about that. Is that right?
Yeah, what I'm saying essentially is that racists may prefer one race to another, but they prefer themselves to everybody else.